Welcome to the Center for Global Development. I'm Amanda Glassman, Executive Vice President and Senior Fellow. Together with my colleague, Liliana Rojas-Suarez, Director of the Latin America Initiative and a Senior Fellow as well, we're really honored to host today's forum with 4 of the 5 candidates to the presidency of the Inter-American Development Bank. All the candidates were invited to this session. We hold these fora around the elections of the multilateral development banks to raise the visibility of these important sources of development finance and to enhance the transparency and public debate around their leadership contests. Most recently, in 2020, we hosted the candidates to the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, but we've also held similar events around the African Development Bank's leadership contest and the World Bank. Too often, elections and international agencies are happening behind closed doors, so we're really happy that our candidates have chosen to join us today to have a conversation about the role. The IDB is hugely consequential in the coming days and months and years. Given the uncertain economic and fiscal outlook, COVID-19 setbacks in education and health, rising demands for social protection, baseline inequalities, migration pressures, and of course, global challenges such as climate change. So joining us today ahead of the IDB election on November 20th, this Sunday, are Gerardo Esquivel, nominated by Mexico, Nicolás Ezaguirre, nominated by Chile, Ilan Goldfein, nominated by Brazil, and Jerry Johnson, nominated by Trinidad and Tobago. We'll kick off with a kind of general question for our nominees, and we'll go in alphabetical order. We're asking, what are the priorities for the region? What do you see as the role of the IDB in their response? And how would you like your tenure to be judged? Let's start with you, Gerardo. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks for the invitation, first of all. And I'm really grateful for the CGD for organizing this event. I think it's very important, given the relevance of the institution, given the fact that we don't often have candidates from the region, or at least in the previous designation, we didn't have candidates from the regions. I think it's very good that we now have 5 candidates in this process, and in that sense, I think it's relevant to listen to the different views that we might have. And in that sense, I'm very happy for this initiative, and I congratulate you for that. I say hello to my fellow members of the process, Ilan, Nicolás, and Gerard. And what I would say about what I see as the priorities and the role for the IDB, I would say is the following. First of all, the IDB is a financial institution, but it's much more than a financial institution. I mean, it's an instrument for development. I think it has a great relevance in the region, not just because of the resources that the institution makes available for the countries at accessible rates, but also it has the fact that it disseminates knowledge, learns from best practices, helps countries with technical assistance, but also it has to provide the necessary leadership in a world in which the situation is very complex, as Amanda just described. We are coming out from 2 different shocks, very important shocks in the world economy. First of all, the pandemics that will have significant negative effects in the economies for a long time. We have a significant scarring process with already significant impacts on output, income, and of course, other dimensions, health, and eventually in terms of learning losses, that all of that will have an effect in the future, probably in terms of impacts on the income of those children that today were not able to continue their learning processes at the different levels in school. Of course, impacts on labor force participation, especially by women, and so on and so forth. So we have all these shocks going on. And so the region in general will have significant demands for these needed social protection mechanisms to help them cope with this situation. But in addition to that, we have the shock coming from the situation in Ukraine, and that has generated this increase in prices of food and energy. And as we know, that disproportionately affects the poorest households in the world, and specifically in Latin America, because they spend a larger share of their income in food. And so we have this other shock, and the response that the institutions are having, including the central banks, is the increase in interest rates and moving from an accommodative stance to a restrictive stance. And that means that interest rates have increased. And for those countries that engage in countercyclical fiscal policies, they now have higher debt levels and that they are facing less access to the financial resources. So we have all this complex situation coming out from these two shocks. And I believe that's an important situation, a complex world in which an institution like the IDB has an important role to play. And I think for that, first of all, we need clarity in the terms of the priorities. How are we, the region itself is going to reinsert within the global economy. And I believe the opportunity for the region is in this process of globalization that is going to take place, we can integrate better compared to what we have done in the past. Recognizing the heterogeneity of the region, we have Mexico more integrated to the US and North American economy. We have a more diversified as well. We have South America, which is more diversified in terms of the trade neighbors, trade partners, but also concentrated a lot of the production in terms of commodities. And we have the Caribbean, for example, a less diversified region, focused a lot in terms of tourism, are greatly affected by climate change situation. So we have this heterogeneous region for which the IDB has to provide resources, financial resources, but also this technical assistance, and help the region to go ahead in this new and difficult global context. And that's what I'm offering, this leadership in this process. I have a vision of what I want to have for the region. This has to do with this reinsertion of the global economy, this participation, different participation of the region in the global value chain production system that we have at the world economy, and helping to face and to focus again on the critical issues that were on the early, in the beginning of the institution, which were fighting poverty and inequality. We should remember that the institution has development not just on its name, but it's on its heart, on its foundations. And I think we should go back to focus on those issues, plus the new demands that a situation is requiring, like focusing on climate change and gender inclusion and racial inclusion as well, and other dimensions of development, to have a comprehensive view and not just a financial dimension, which is relevant, but it's not the only dimension that we should care about. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much for kicking us off. Now over to you, Nicolas.
Well, thank you very much for the center. It's a pleasure to be with you, Amanda and Liliana. I know Liliana for some time, so it's a pleasure to see her again. And also to the fellow candidates. I know some of them, and I'm sure that whatever the result is, the IDB will have a strong leadership going forward. I feel very much interpreted by what Gerardo was saying. We in our country have always put forward the inclusion and social issues, not just as an ethical thing, but also as a prerequisite when it comes to sustainable development. To see what we hope to deliver if we get elected, we have to start by saying, how do we see the situation? There is no such a thing as a steady state in the region. We know that we are from one shock to another shock. But maybe this time around is particularly special, since, as Gerardo was pointing out, we're in the middle of a lot of forces that will stress the IDB resources in somewhat different directions. Ever since the 2008, the subprime crisis, which I lived very directly because I was in the fund at the time, we have still legacies of that in terms of reduced fiscal space, which means that countries are way less equipped now than they were at that time to do counter-cyclical policy. But also, growth has been very disappointing. After 2008, half of what it used to be in the 15 years before. Export growth has been just a third of what it used to be in volumes, which speaks a lot about competitiveness. So In the narrow economic sense, we have less growth and less productivity growth. But also, including the big shock of the pandemic, and as Gerardo was saying, the social gaps seem to have widened rather than closed. It's dramatic what's going on with schools and poor students learning less and increasing gaps. The fight towards inclusion of, or towards gender equality, or inclusion of minorities at large, including Indian population, including diversity, has stalled as well. And migration has not been stopped. It's the other way around. It has increased. And last but not least, our contribution to stop climate change has been disappointing. And some in the region are suffering that way more than others, especially in Central America and the Caribbean. If that were not enough, we have, as Gerardo was pointing out, a worrisome macroeconomic situation because interest rates are skyrocketing because of inflation and the problem in Ukraine. And it's not just base interest rates, but also spreads. Spreads for some countries are increasing with the day. And each day we learn of another Latin American country that is cut out from the markets. So for me, leadership in these years to come is all going to be about building consensus, because resources are always going to be scarce for these daunting challenges. And naturally, the priorities of different countries are going to be different. It's entirely natural that the non-debtor countries are expecting the Latin American region and the IDB in particular to foster public common goods. For some countries, the urgencies of the short run are going to be the ones that are going to be more close to their needs. For some others, would be gender equality or to stop migration. So this is nothing that you can criticize. A very diverse region and a very, very diverse community of this credit union that is the IDB will have different objectives that will sometimes, be difficult to reconcile. So what I guess our experience, my country's experience, and my particular experience is somewhat strong, is that we have been able to reach those consensus when those things, after the dictatorship, seemed completely impossible. But we managed to do this. And we have grown. We have progress in social equity. We have a big road ahead of us, but we have made a lot of progress. So building consensus is the word, the key word in my view. And for that, it is important to remind that the one that runs the institution is the executive board, not the president. The president is the chief executive officer. And you have to make the better possible combination between three legs, or four, I would say. First is the executive board and the membership. Second is the best possible upper management. And third is the staff, with the staff feeling that really have incidence and influence. And without us being able to select and retain the better staff possible, this tremendous and daunting challenge will not be met. Okay. In short, I think we have a lot of assets. The IDB has and should retain the AAA status. We have stupendous staff, and we have a body of knowledge of the region at the country and even regional level that is nowhere else but in the IDB. But we have to put it all together, build consensus, and being able to go ahead in common. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, Ilan, over to you.
Thank you, Amanda. Thank you, Liliana, for the invitation. It's an honor to be here with the other candidates, Gerardo, Nicolas, Gerard. It's a pleasure to be here. The questions are very good. What are our priorities? So we need to be able to answer the priorities. We need to have a vision. And the vision for me is to bring back the IDB to be the most important multilateral institution in the region. And it needs to be the multilateral institution that it is a place where all members come for excellence. It needs to be the institutions that have a vision and project this vision together towards the rest of the world. It needs to be the most important institution that staff is proud and is back to be motivated. Morale is low at this point. What do we need? We need leadership. We need motivation. And the leadership should be somebody non-ideological, not partisan, independent, somebody that knows the region with international experience, somebody with managerial experience, somebody that knows about what is the development needs and what the IDB needs to do. Your question was very clear. What are the priorities? So here are the 3 priorities I would recommend. And of course, you need to give priorities because when you have too many priorities, you don't have any priority. And I fear that some of our institutions have too many priorities. So let's go directly. First, we need to have an institution that deals with poverty, inequality in several dimensions, and something that is very urgent, food insecurity in the region and globally. Poverty, we have very good experiences with social safety nets, and we need to push for them. Inequality, we need to look for diversity, gender, race, regional, the small and island economies, but also the large. And in terms of food insecurity, we need to be able to reach the most vulnerable. Number 2, climate change. We need to go target the Paris goals of lower carbon. At the IDB, we do have some target levels for resources, 30%. We need to discuss with the board how we're going to increase the 30% to more than that, maybe reach 40% at some point. But we have to do it with no greenwashing. There's no solution just to go a number and be greenwashed. So we need to do it in a very responsible way with the board and really, really having green financing. In that regard, we do have in the region, Caribbean and Central America, that are already suffering the consequences of the climate change. Hurricanes, natural disasters, and we need to be agile at the IDB to respond to that. And we need to adapt these countries in terms of infrastructure, but also in terms of financial structure. How are we going to ensure? I haven't been, in my experience in the last year that I'm here in Washington, a good insurance view. We need to have open mind to do it. Number 3, infrastructure. This is typical IDB, poverty, infrastructure, physical, sustainable infrastructure, but also digital. And here we need private money to come together. Resources are finite, so we need to be able to catalyze. This is easier said than done. We all say we're going to bring money, capital, but we are not going to get there. How to do it? Well, human resources. We have experience, and the IDB has been excellent for some time. Second, indicator evidence-based bank. Third, write the capital adequacy framework, and keep the highest rating. Fourth, transparency, accountability, and dialogue with the board and other stakeholders. To conclude, because I see that I have 1 minute, what I said is that we need to have a vision to have the bank to be the most important institution in the dimensions I mentioned. We need to have priorities: poverty, inequality, food insecurity; second, climate change; third, investment in infrastructure. And to be able to do it, you need leadership, invest in human capital, and to have evidence and a data bank in the IDB. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Okay, Jerry, over to you.
How's that?
Perfect.
Thank you. I made it just under the wire. I know I only have 5 minutes. I'm going to hurry up. I appreciate the space. I came in a little bit late, but I imagine you've spoken about the crisis. We know that it's historical proportions, and we know that in a crisis of this nature, already we're talking about a lost decade. And guess who loses when you lose a decade? The people, the companies that don't have a cushion at the bottom. So probably those at the top won't feel any change in their lifestyle. Maybe there'll be a number of their bank account that'll change, but at the bottom, it's a totally different story. Funny thing about the IDB, they've called it more than a bank. Okay, so what's that mean? You know, when there's conflict, when there are weak institutions, when there's a macroeconomic instability, banks run the other way. IDB runs towards the problem. IDB is at a, as everybody knows, is a turning point. It's been hit hard, but it has everything that it needs to play an important role in the crisis that we're facing. The important thing to remember, I think, I will offer, is that large ideas and large strategies are vital to point the way north. But for them to turn into something real, for them to materialize, to move from being large ideas and strategies to actually changing people's lives, to actually meaning something for people, they have to turn into projects. That's how the IDB is structured, or programs, or interventions that actually happen on the ground. And as you know, the IDB doesn't build the bridges. The IDB doesn't, create a new school system or fix a hospital. It's a government. It's fiscal space. It's a delicate negotiation of and finding of common ground with a government that borrows money to make an investment that will have a return that exceeds the cost of the financing. But IDB brings more than that. It brings expertise to shape that. The field is crowded. You've got other DFIs in the same space, sometimes competing for the same project. I think the IDB has got to focus on quality. Private sector, at the end of the day, the fiscal space of governments is tiny, and the crisis will make it shrink even further. There has to be a more serious engagement with the private sector. I think that's what Luis Alberto Moreno opened the IDB's eyes to, was that the private sector has to be our partner. I think we have to do a better job of doing that. The crisis could also be an opportunity. It could be, when you deal with reform of the way the game is played, of what the legs and regs are for private investment, for government, for transparent, efficient government, for the quality of delivery of health services or education services. Those reforms, it means you have to change the status quo. In our countries, it's kind of hard to move away from the status quo. Well, when there's a crisis, things get looser. And that's where a bank that knows how to engage, that knows the client, and in a way, the client's our boss. You show up, the scripts of our salaries, the bank salaries are paid. It's hard for me to take off the bank shirt, even though I left it so long ago. The complex relationship is that we're dealing with a client who's our boss. It's a cooperative that's structured in that way. the IDB has to reset. There are various studies and proposals for how to fix the bank, how to make sure that it doesn't have a destabilizing moment again. How that's going to come out is key as to what the new relationships will look like. And I think the staff cannot be kept on hold, waiting to know which way is north, what is the strategy for the next 10 years, and what are the rules of the game, what are the products that they're going to be able to deploy. We need to hurry that up. That reform process cannot be delayed. It's got to happen definitively and in a way that respects and reestablishes the delicate balance in the bank of big countries, small countries, borrowing, non-borrowing, etc. So I would say that going forward, selfishly, no matter who is chosen, there's some incredibly strong candidates, good people, people who care about development and understand what it is. But those big picture strategies, climate change, nearshoring, energy transition, increasing diversity, those things will remain ideas unless you turn them into concrete deliverables that can be measured and that move the needle of of development. So I'll leave it there. Hope I went in on the time.
You did. You kept exactly to time. Thank you so much. What a great group of candidates. It's great to hear your thoughts about the priorities, challenges facing the region and the role of the IDB. Let me turn now to Liliana, who will follow up.
Thank you, Amanda. And yes, it's great to say hello to this group of candidates. Most of them are my friends, so I'm actually delighted to be here with you today. We thought that perhaps we should now continue our conversation with a little more specific questions on the topics that you have been mentioning and discussing. So perhaps we could continue with addressing your views on the role of the IDB in the highly volatile global financial environment. So dig a little bit deeper on that topic. So this question is for Ilan and Nicolas. You both stressed in your initial remarks the problem of low growth, low productivity, the need to fund projects in the region. Now, if elected, you would be presiding during a period where cost of financing has increased significantly and funding projects in Latin America and the Caribbean are facing greater challenge than in the previous decade. How do you see the role of the IDB in supporting countries' increased financing needs? Would you support changes in the IDB terms of finance to ease borrowing constraints? If you think so, which ones? Ilan first, please.
Thank you, Liliana. It's very nice to see you again here. Your questions are very good. We are entering a period of high borrowing costs globally. Market access will be more difficult. Even if you get access, it will be at higher rates. We are probably going to have some global deceleration. So it is going to be a beginning for the next president with a challenging global scenario in a region that has been struggling to get higher growth over time. Let me start answering about the short term. I think when interest rates go up and you are in a moment of more difficulties of financing, I believe the multilateral banks and the multilateral organizations have a more important role. This is where actually you can get financing at interest rates that are better than countries can get, if they can get outside. And I believe that that will be a moment where we're going to get more demand for resources, more need for the IDB to be engaged. And here is where you need to focus on your priorities very carefully. You need to look what is essential, what is not essential. Financing and trying to solve food insecurity, this is urgent. Fighting poverty when poverty increased quite a bit. Inequality is an issue. Social responsibility with economic responsibility. You cannot be sustainable economically if you're not socially. So that things are important. Invest in infrastructure. Push countries in the climate change that are suffering natural disasters, where the islands, for example, have their 50% of GDP of costs. These are urgent things, so this is where you need to put your money. Now, you ask how can we get it? Can you loosen the lending? I don't think that's the solution. What you do need is to look at the capital adequacy framework from the G20, where there are very good recommendations of how to optimize your balance sheet. Can we bring guarantees to help you to lend more with less risk? Look at the riskiness, the risk tolerance you have. Can you buy and sell? You buy some stuff and sell. Can you cross guarantee with other regional banks? Things that kind of diversify your region. There are solutions, but you need to be open for that, and you need to be very clear. It is clear that the IDB cannot lose his AAA rating. So that has to be a responsibility of the president. But at the same time, the president needs to be aware that you will need more resources because of the scenario that comes ahead. Last but not least, Liliana, IDB Invest and IDB Lab. IDB Invest, financing the private sector, has been quite a bright spot in the IDB, and that needs to continue. And the IDB Lab puts the innovation and the technology where it needs to be, and not only in the IDB Lab, but in the rest of the IDB. That's essential for growth. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ilan. Your thoughts, Nicolas?
Well, thank you, Liliana. As you were rightly pointing out, and I guess that was sort of the thrust of my initial words, is that you can set a list of priorities, but since we all know development, because this is a development bank, is very much holistic in nature, or if you want a general equilibrium, it depends a lot on what the juncture, what the situation, how markets evolve, how climate evolves, how migration evolves, where the exact priorities will be. So that's why I stress that consensus building is by far the more important asset in an institution like the IDB. Now, going to your point, it looks like financial squeezing is going to be with us for some time. I hope it's not as bad as it was at the beginning of the 80s, but you cannot, not just because of humanitarian reasons, you cannot forget that part. Because when you put all the weight in adjustment and little in financing, what at the end you are doing is compromising crucial public goods that will influence your long-term growth capabilities. Many of our countries, as you know better than me, adjusted in the 80s and some in the 90s as well, through less public education, less infrastructure, less health. And that takes, sooner or later, a big toll on growth. So this separation between short-term and long-term is somewhat artificial. It is true that we should try to complement as much and not substitute with other financial institutions. And predominantly the work of, say, short-term financing is the work of the IMF, that Ilan and myself know very well. But in some countries, big projects that are financed by the IDB, even if they are projects, they are decisive when it comes to balance of payment or government financing. So the IDB has a role in short-term financing as well, whether we would like it or not. And therefore, we should be very open to understand the different needs in different countries. Now, how to finance that? How to avoid that much tension between short-term and long-term ends? I agree with what Ilan was saying. there are ways within an envelope of capital to increase the capacity of lending. First of all, we have to review what is called effectiveness of development. And the numbers that the IDB, through the Evaluation Office, has collected are not great. The quality of lending should be improved. Second, as every bank knows, and I've been in the board of banks, if some loans are, you can make a package of them and sell them to the private sector, what is called securitization. You should do that because you will discharge or you will save capital in order to do more things. Third, as Ilan was putting forward as well, if you have bilateral guarantees or what is called, generally speaking, enhancements that load the risk of loans, means that you can lend more with maintaining the AAA and given the capital adequacy ratios. Let me say that if all the above wouldn't be necessary, enough, because the financial strains would get worse, we should talk with the membership about capital. Whether to do it through bid invest or the bid itself is an open matter. And again, consensus building is very important. But it would be blind or myopic to think that everything could be channeled through the private sector. I am of the view that, in general, whatever could be through institutional building and risk diversification could be channeled to the private sector and away from the public sector, the better. We have done a lot of that here in the Southern Cone and in my country in particular. But to connect markets with risky or social endeavors is not trivial. You have to do institutions, legal frameworks, regulation to be able to bundle participants. So I think we will try to deepen the private branch of the IDB as much as possible, but that would not be instantaneous. So the direction is clear, but the pace will be dictated very much by how tight the situation is.
Liliana.
You're muted. Okay.
Maybe on your last point around stretching the balance sheet versus other strategies to increase lending, given this period of time of both short-term needs as well as these long-term development priorities. Can I poll the rest of the candidates quickly on your thoughts on this? Maybe starting with Jerry.
Sorry, just say it one more time, please. You took me by surprise.
Nicolas sort of introduced the different strategies that might be available to the IDB board and the leadership to expand lending. So the question is sort of what are you thinking in that regard?
Okay. First of all, the principle of preserving the AAA rating of the bank, I think both said that, and I share that 100%. I think the problem was cited that spreads not only are rising, but they can rise very quickly, and that can create. People have spoken about the risk of sovereign debt crisis. Obviously, the spike in spreads is something that poses a great risk to the macroeconomic stability of the countries. The IDB can provide, I think as was said, tenors that are much longer, and it can share its AAA rating with its members. The link, however, to a capital increase, I think I would be more cautious in the sense that I think that the whole issue, as you know, is a contentious issue. There's not consensus on that. And of course, the president, whoever it is, would have to find common ground on that. But I think that before making it, looking at it from a financial point of view, I think that issue is something that needs to be dealt with and driven by the overarching strategy of the bank. What does the bank want to be? What difference does it want to make? What sectors, what are the large strategic lines of the bank for the next decade? And even drill down one level, what are the tools that the bank is going to, there's not even agreement in the bank as to the tools that it wants to use. So once it's clear what the strategic direction of the bank is, what the tools, because of course the tools determine how quickly the bank's resources are absorbed, regardless of the rates that it offers. It's can you actually access it? And only I think once those decisions have been made and the bank, there's been a consensus on that and the bank is ready to move forward, I would bring up I would enter the minefield, necessary minefield of the capital increase. Thanks.
Great. Over to you, Gerardo. Another sort of wrinkle on this for all of us to think about is, what's the role of the IDB versus the World Bank, for example, in the region, or the subnational development banks in terms of the full response to countries? But over to you, Gerardo. What's your view on this?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. I think I'll start by saying, probably for the benefit of the public that is watching us, to explain one thing which is relevant. I mean, the IDB has these two windows of lending resources to the countries. One is the public window, which is a typical traditional window in which the bank has served and attended demands from the governments. And this private window, which is a relatively recent innovation, which is IDB Invest. That's the way it's called. So the discussion has been about how to increase resources for the institution and whether we should go into a new round of capitalization. And what I would say is that without necessarily eliminating the possibility of discussing this increase in resources for the public window, what we need to do first is to evaluate carefully what we are doing. I don't think it makes too much sense to increase the resources if we are not able to use the resources that we already have available in an effective way. I think it's important in that dimension. A recent report by the Independent Evaluation Office here at the IDB, who precisely said that there are windows of opportunity to improve the effectiveness of the loans that we are making for different projects or public policies as well. So I think what I would start with is by making a much important effort in terms of improving the quality of our lending, improving the impact of our lending. And I think for that, I have a lot of experience being an evaluator of many of the social programs and so on. So I think the relevance of that is critical. We cannot underestimate it, and we have to use that precisely to think about this. Once we do that, we can just go with the potential contributing countries to discuss the possibility of increasing and capitalizing the bank in this public window. So this is one thing that I would do, or what I suggest to do. Now, with respect to the private window that we have, I think there we have a lot of opportunities. There we have, it's much smaller right now, but there is a lot of possibilities to increase the resources there. I think there's a willingness to increase resources there. And given the heterogeneous nature of the countries that we are in the region, given the fact that they are in different levels of development and they have different even budgeting processes, so that they sometimes require resources from one window or from the other, it is important to have all these resources available of one kind and the other. And I think in the IDB Invest window, we have the possibility to capitalize that window and to potentiate the resources that are already there, using many of these innovations, financial innovations, like including guarantees that are clearly underused in general in the region, or using derivatives, using this cross exchange of loans with other agencies, and so on and so forth. I mean, this kind of financial innovations that might help us to potentiate the resources that we have in the private window. And we know that there are countries that only want to rely upon the private window. Mexico is one example of that. other countries might need for different reasons to rely more upon the public window. So we have to be as flexible as we can be in order to be able to address the needs of different countries in the region. Thank you.
Thank you, Gerardo. Ilan, very, very briefly, what's your take on this?
Well, I believe that there are a pecking order here in terms of the use of capital. First, as I mentioned before, we need to be able to optimize, buy and sell, cross guarantees. We need to be able to have blended instruments where part of this is IDB money and part of it is other type of money. And we have the green bonds is an example of what you can do. So that's important. So I think we can increase a few billions coming from this optimism if it's well made. But it has to be also looking at the effectiveness of the loans. You know that there's an evaluation office, which is independent, that has looked at effectiveness in terms of development impact and have made recommendations saying that they need to be more effective, the loans. So first of all, you start with that. Second, as I mentioned, IDB Invest and IDB Lab. IDB Invest, there is an IDB Invest 2.0, where there's a project, and this is growing. And I think there is less of a controversy whether we should increase capital on where it is going in terms of the IDB Invest. And finally, we will need at some point, given that there's quite a bit of a need, especially this time, to bring a discussion about capital in the public IDB. But this is the pecking order we need to do it, and this is where we need to go. And again, you need to do it preserving the ratings. You need to do it preserving the IDB as the leading institution in the region. So it will need quite a bit of managerial experience, quite a bit of knowledge of the region, and I think the next president will have quite a lot of work to start with.
Thank you so much to all of you. I mean, the time is running really fast. Amanda and I had so many questions, and we won't have the time to put them all to you. I'm going to ask a kind of a twofold question, different in nature, but I think that the audience would like to know your views on both, okay? So the first one is on the role of the IDB to support climate. Specifically, you know, many of the countries in the region are exporters of goods that are high in capital fossils products. So should the IDB finance gas and nuclear projects or mining? What are your general views on that? That's the first question. And the second question that we really don't want to end the panel without discussing is that you all mentioned that the IDB very highly valuable resources is its human capital. If we look into the IDB's internal culture and governance, what do you think are the needed steps to rebuild transparency, quality, confidence, and morale under the next presidency? Please keep into account that you have the entire IDB watching you right now. So let's start in alphabetical order. Gerardo first, very briefly on each one. It's just that we really want to cover these issues and we're running to have the time.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I start with the climate change issue. It's clear that we need to address the climate change in different directions. One is to attack the idea of not contributing to the sources that are generating this situation. For that matter, is that the IDB has this rule that doesn't allow financing of anything that has to do with fossil fuels ahead. So this is an important, it's already established. It's there, and I think that's the way it should be. And in addition to that, has these requirements for projects to have objectives and targets in terms of the impact that they might have in this dimension. So that's well established. We can discuss whether we should increase the targets here or not, but that's I think it's already there on the rules for lending from the institution. Now we have to do much more on that, because one thing is to fight the origins of climate change, but also we have to work in terms of adaptation and mitigation of the negative costs which are already taking place. Precisely, the Caribbean countries are badly affected by climate change, as we know. They are very vulnerable in terms of they can be affected by hurricanes, for example. So we can think we need to think about that. And for that, I think that the potential use of catastrophic bonds would be very helpful for the region ahead. And I think this is one of the things that the IDB, an institution which is supranational, can help in terms of addressing this dimension. This is the first, regarding the first part of the question. About the second one thing that I have offered, and I have in my talks with all the members of the board, I have been talking to most of them, what I've been telling them is that what we need to do within the institution, first of all, is to rebuild the confidence and trust. I think, and this has to happen through dialogue and respect. I think this is a dimension that I was not completely aware of, but it is clear that something is going on within the institution, and we need to work in that. And what I'm offering, that's my attitude always, is being respectful and constructive. If the board, if the management and the board are not able to work constructively and positively within the institution, I think the institution will not be able to act and to have a beneficial effect for the region as a whole. I think we have to work together, the management and the board of directors, in order to rebuild this trust and confidence, and to boost the morale also of the staff. We have an excellent staff, a lot of talent, a lot of human capital, but I think probably what they can contribute ahead probably needs also to have a better workplace environment here at the institution. And this is something that I'm really committed to improve if I'm designated. Otherwise, I think this is a necessary step ahead, because the institution will not be as effective as it could be if things remain as they are today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gerardo. Nicolas, your views on those two topics, please.
Well, I agree very much with what Gerardo said, but this is more complicated when you delve into the issues than when it may seem. I agree that we should not finance an expansion of fossil fuels, but when you go to the effects of climate change, some countries may be closer to have alternative energy facilities. We are blessed in this sense. I mean, Chile, because of solar and other forms of energy. That's why we are going to go into the massive production of green hydrogen. But that may be way more costly in other parts. Mm-hmm. And where you have predominantly fossil fuels, well, there is a big cost to adjust. So we have to look at it in a sort of systemic way, not to burden excessively the ones that are, suffering the most or even contaminating them more. But we should have global targets. For instance, the problem in the Caribbean is very critical these days, and they were not the ones that contributed the most to global warming. So you have to have an eye on that. Keeping with my systemic kind of reasoning, if you do too little adjustment in general, too little financing, and countries do have a sort of a recessionary adjustment, well, that will hurt climate change as well, because people in desperation between, to feed themselves, doing a lot of damage to the environment. So this needs to be systemical. But having said that, I guess the contribution of the region to the global fight against climate change should be stepped up very markedly. related to this, to food security. The region used to be sort of the one that feed the world back in the 19th century, right after the Industrial Revolution. We should go back to that. But this needs technological change. This needs a lot of things that should be financed publicly and sometimes privately. Finally, or last but not least, as I already mentioned, the climate, the work climate, the good relation between the upper management, the staff, and the membership, and also the membership at the ground level, is crucial. If not, things will not get done. I have been lucky enough, sorry to get personal, but I have had among my subordinates one lady that is today the foreign relations ministers, 3 ministers of finance, 1 minister of the economy, and 1 minister of gender equality. So my experience has been that if you really trust your subordinates and you really put forward the notion that merit is the basic consideration when it comes to your progress in your career, this has an incredibly high rate of return. And transparency in the career, not opacity or interventions that are not very clearly understood, or marginalization of the staff from the decisions is really a poisons everything. So I'm very committed to this issue because I fully believe in that.
Thank you so much, Nicolas. Could we continue with Ilan, please?
Yes, thank you. Those are very important questions. One on the climate issues, and the other one on how do we motivate the human capital that the IDB. I remember when you were there also. So it is quite essential. On climate change, we need to push for what IDB has been doing. It has been an important player with that. As I mentioned, we need to look at whether we can increase the resources for that. Whether the amount are good enough, 30%, maybe we can go to 35, 40% with the discussion the board has discussed, but it cannot be a greenwashing, and that's very important in that. On the other side, we need to care about our small and island economies. They are suffering, and I mentioned this is quite relevant. And I'm from Brazil, so we cannot forget about the Amazon. I've been in a NGO where people were dealing with the Amazon and the people from there. So preservation of the biodiversity, preservation of the forest cannot be ignored. This is important for the region, but it is important globally. In terms of the human capital, this will be my first things to look. You cannot manage an institution if you don't have human capital, the right people. I believe that you need to have the knowledge, the expertise, but also the diversity. And diversity in several dimensions: gender, race, also regional, small, island, large. We need to have it based on merit. So people need to look at the results, and the results the performance will depend on the result, the final result. And that's quite important. Finally, I need to say, you need to have leadership where people look at the leader and they say, this is the leader that we would like to follow. And the leader needs to be somebody that understands the region, that have international experience, that have management experience, and that people look and says, yes, this is where we're going to regain the role of the IDB in the region, but also projected globally. Thank you.
Thank you, Ilan. Tajeri, you have the last word on these two very important issues. You're muted.
Sorry, it'll work better when it's unmuted. Thank you. I'll be as brief as I can. Everybody has somewhere to go. I know it's already time's up. The specific question about gas mining. Well, gas different because it's been accepted as a clean fuel, as a transition fuel. I think it was Gerardo who said, this is a decision made in consensus by the bank, that the bank has a negative list. Of course, as you know, the list is much longer than these items that you chose. And so any change in it obviously is going to have to balance the interests of regionals and non-regionals. But I'll say that, personally, one big factor in excluding the mining of hydrocarbons, for example, is that, they don't really need the IDB money. So, for all the places we're going to put our resources, maybe we could find other sectors that are more, that actually need financing. Especially these days with the kind of windfall profits, I don't think there's a lot of help needed. There's quickly on climate change. I think it's important for me to make reference to the Bridgetown Agenda. Our incredible international leader, Mia Mottley from Barbados. The fantastic job being done to drill down a little bit and say, yes, we've got to tackle global warming and we have to reduce emissions. But there's an unequal situation where those who have perhaps have contributed the least to the problem are paying the highest price for it. And they're the most vulnerable countries I'm speaking about. The kinds of solutions that people, Mia, Avinash Prasad, the kind of solutions that they're coming up with are innovative, but they're going to need a vehicle to deliver them. And I think the IDB could be that vehicle for some. Great ideas need to turn into reality, and that's what the IDB does. The staff. I think it was President Iglesias who said that the IDB goes down the elevator at the end of the day. It's all about the people. And IDB has got great people. It's got cutting edge professionals. Its research, its analytical work is on the front line. It can stand in any test of quality. And I don't think that's the issue. The issue is not the quality. Of course, somebody said you have to retain them. Definitely. Their issue is about pay. We have to be able to be competitive to keep the best. If we don't have the best, we can't compete. You talked quickly about other development agencies in the region, about duplication with bilaterals. I don't think it's a race to the bottom that we try to, get the cheapest and quickest project out. I think we need the best projects. We have to compete on quality. And for that, we need the best people. The staff, from what I've been able to hear these days that I've been here and talking to old friends, they're waiting and anxious to get going. Any discussion about restructuring of the bank, of how the relationships between the board and management work, between the board and the president, those reforms will have a direct impact when the troops land and meet with the national authorities, who are the client, but also their boss. And they have to negotiate a strategy for engagement with that country that then turns into projects. They have to look behind them and they have to see a chain of command that's transparent, that's predictable, and that's consistent. And therefore, the internal reforms of the bank are urgent in order to empower the troops to deliver the product. At the end of the day, the president is the icon of the bank. The president's energy, the president's commitment to development, the president's mystica, that thing that makes you opt for the IDB versus private banking. You'd earn a lot more money. Maybe with the same degree, you could earn a lot more money in private banking. But that thing that makes you go into development, that's what matters. And that pride to put on the IDB's shirt and to say, yeah, I represent the IDB. I think we can get it back, and that's what we've got to do. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Jerry. And actually, thank you all. This has been an incredible discussion. Amanda and I have been really honored to host you. We had the pleasure of having 4 of the 5 candidates. It's unfortunate that we couldn't come with Cecilia Todesca for this meeting, but we have really enjoyed our conversation with you. The pressing economic and social issues in Latin America and the Caribbean are certainly of crucial importance to the research and activities of the Center for Global Development. The challenges that the region faces are enormous, as you had said, and therefore this is time for cooperation and partnership that you have all emphasized to work toward common goals. You have all emphasized the importance of human capital at the IDB. I would like to add that that was precisely the message that former presidents Enrique Iglesias and Luis Alberto Moreno delivered in an event that we hosted last month. We'll be definitely following very closely the result from the elections on Sunday. Here at the Center of Global Development, we wish you all the best luck. Amanda and I thank all the candidates and the audience for a great discussion. Thanks again, and goodbye.
Thank you.